Fictional Page presents Read Before Midnight, Season 1,
Episode 8, Witches of Nantahala,
by W.H. Maxwell. Read by the author.
A quick word before we begin tonight's reading. Thank you for being with me here tonight, and for continuing on through this season. I hope you've enjoyed what you've heard so far. We are approaching the end of Season 1 now, and I intend to complete and wrap up the remaining 3 stories here in the next several weeks to release to you. I apologize for the delay between this episode and the one before it. It was very much my intention to release these episodes much earlier. However, due to some equipment that was broken and needed to be replaced, as well as a short stint in the American hospital system, which is a horror story completely its own, I was unable to do so. So it's with great pleasure that I'm able to present Witches of Nantahala tonight. And as always, I ask for your continued support. Please recommend us to a friend. And at the end of the season, I intend to release a written works of the complete stories of Season 1 of Read Before Midnight, as well as a few extra ones that I won't be recording here, and will include in the book for anyone who wants to read along. Now, without further ado, tonight's reading, Witches of Nantahala. Where was that boy? Hannah had been waiting too long. She thought so anyways, looking like a fool out at the end of the road, standing around like a scarecrow. No way for a lady to be treated. Not that she was quite a lady, a girl of 16, but he damn well should treat her like one, she thought. The women of Nantahala tribe were to be feared and respected, Nan would say, and in that order. Another 10 minutes or so, Hannah checked her phone again and again. No texts, snaps, messages of any kind. She thought about writing something to him, half wrote something, then deleted it, she hoped, before he could see it on the other end. Let him sweat it out and get nervous a little himself. She browsed the news, grim as usual, before heading back down the dirt lane. Asshole, she thought, but she let out a sigh with a little weight in her breath. Asshole. Hannah kicked up dust off the dirty lane, shining gold in the summer sun while crickets hummed quickly in the trees. The trees, meanwhile, whispered as she passed down the lane to the family holler. The first house in the little nestle of houses between the hills was old Nan's. Her grandmother, her great-great-grandmother, in truth, though Nan would have none of this great business, was rocking in her favorite chair on the porch, watching her come. Hers was the first house on the lane, an owl's perch for the ancient woman to sit in her shawl, drink her tea, and smoke her tobacco. When Hannah looked up to see her, as though her name had been called, she saw Nan waving her up with one thin arm. Listening to Nan was just what you did. It wasn't an invitation so much as a command. Her old arm like a fisherman's rod, pulling in the wayward soul closer. But they all loved Nan, and all of her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. It was Hannah Nan called on most. "Fetch me my bacca, child, and sit down," Nan said in her tired voice. "What's frowning you? I can see it, you know, written all on your face." Hannah sat down in the rocker next to Nan. "Nothing." A boy, huh?" Nan said. "Ain't no use thinking on it or mustering a conversation. Most times, anyway." The old woman rubbed her lined and leathery hands together, like a squirrel pawing on a nut. "Get me my bacca from inside stairs, and I'll tell you what about boys." Hannah did, standing and meandering her way inside to find the packet of cigarettes Nan kept, and the lighter that went with it. The lighter, Hannah knew, that had belonged to Grandpa Nestor, Nan's first of 3 husbands. She brought both the cigarettes and the lighter to the old woman, who put the cigarette in her mouth and waited for Hannah to light it. She did, an act of ill for the old woman's health, but born from her granddaughter's love. At her age anyways, Hannah thought, what would the cigarette do? Kill her? Hannah doubted it. This house was the first in the lane, and the first built in the holler when I was much younger, and the 20th century was still fresh, Nan said, exhaling a gentle breath of smoke. That was a long time ago. 3 husbands, 12 children, 13 if you count the one lost, and many, many grandchildren and great-grandchildren had come since then. Too much family and years to count. Hannah listened to the way Nan weaved her words, the rocking chair under her feet the same she had sat in since old Nan had first called her when she was a child. The smell of mint blew in from an errant patch somewhere in the trees beyond. Hannah could hear the bees humming and the creek babbling, and the scene was comfort and home. Old Nan's face was sharp as ever, and she gave the cigarette a long drag while staring deeply at Hannah, or just over Hannah's shoulder, as she was ought to do when thinking, like staring at somebody who wasn't there. "What's got you shook up?" Nan said. "Nothing," Hannah lied again, thinking of her phone and the news. "Story out of Winchester. You hear it?" Old Nan nodded slowly. "On the radio, I heard. Yeah. All them people dead up in Virginia. They think it was the cartels, but they ain't found nobody yet." "Ain't no cartels that done that," old Nan said without humor. "It was vampires." Hannah laughed anyways, the way you do when your grandparents say something crazy and you're too polite to argue. "What? You think I'm joking? You think I'm crazy?" Nan defended with an energy far younger than her years. "It was. 2 of them. A young one and an old one. And I reckon they're headed south. Nothing for a girl like you to think too much on, though." Hannah smiled and rocked, and the wind played chimes on the bottles old Nan hung. "Some boy stand you up, that it," Nan said after the silence passed. "Late, at least," Hannah said. "Make me look like a fool out at the end of the road." Nan shook her head. "There were days the sisters of Nantahala were feared. No man or boy would dare look at us funny, or cast an unkind word about us in earshot or otherwise. And those that came down our lane did so with respect and reverence." Old Nan took another long drag, then spat on the floor of the porch. "There weren't boys back then that stood you up waiting at a lane?" Hannah said. It was old Nan's turn to laugh. "Oh, honey," Nan said when she was done with her slow and dry laughter, like the rustle of reeds in the fall. "All boys are late sometimes. That's not new. But believe it or not, I wasn't always the way you see me now, you know." Hannah did not know exactly. Old Nan looked old, elderly even, but she was far, far older than she looked. Hannah knew that, too. She had outlived all of her natural children and a few of her grandchildren. "I used to be something else. Fine as a glass of cold water on a hot day and far more rare. Revelation stood still in my eyes," the mother once said. But that was a long time ago. And yes, there was once a boy who took too long to come around. Hannah watched as old Nan let the cigarette begin to run a bit, staring off into the distant trees toward the forest and mountains beyond, where the tall, cropped peaks and bald patches of the hills stared back on down. Then she looked back at Hannah, or over her shoulder again, and began to tell her story. Back then, the mother was Mother Sarah, and she had for ages past ruled the Nantahala stretch of forest with a short leash around her sisters and kin. When the new folk had first come to the hills, she was the one chosen to lead, and she did for a good, long while. But by then, it had been too long since the hills had sung back, and the things in the shadows of the trees moved. The forest was growing still again, as it were now. Many moons, again and again, I would watch the mother call and the sisters sneak out from their cottages and homesteads at night, tiptoeing through the trees to the clearing at the end of the path, like wisps in the moonlight, white gowns streaming slowly through the grasses and the creeks. Me and the other girls, Liza and Burl, would hide in the shadows and follow. We would hide and sneak until we saw the fires, and then we would watch the sisters dance. Hundreds there were back then. Still, though, I never saw during the days when Mother Sarah sat on her throne and watched. Never did I feel his presence. Nothing to make the world stir. There was little magic left from the mother before, and the creatures no longer stirred. Even still, the sisters danced. Each moon she called in the night, and each time they danced and danced. And when I was a girl, old enough to know the way of things, I would hear the voice in the night too. It would wake me up, hot breath in my ear, like the mother was standing right there. A few times even, I felt the hand reach down and shake me. But when my eyes would open, it would only be me and Liza, both awake from the same voice, the same calling. And we would go, and we would dance, and Mother Sarah would watch and gesture and grunt meekly. Always she kept that book of hers beside her, covetous of the knowledge she had been given. Until one day, I met a boy. No, not your grandfather Nestor, if that was what you was going to ask. He would come along much later, when the wilder years of my life were at the end of their summer. No, that year I was in the spring of my youth, and Liza and Burl and our mother were coming back from church one Sunday and passing through the courthouse lawn. Emmett Adams, the tall and broad-chested and handsome son of an Englishman, came strolling the other way. He was on a holiday that summer between primary schooling and university, and had traveled up into the hills to a family estate for hunting and fishing and whatnot. His family had made a fortune after the Reconstruction, down in the low country, and he had taken to tomcatting around the town in between his leisure to find his leisure, if you follow. My mama had frowned, a look that could very much chill the air, and my sisters giggled when he passed. But he and I locked eyes, and he smiled that perfect grin of his, and I knew I had to have him. And in that moment, I thought of the river then, the bend in it, where my sisters and I would sometimes swim, and I knew he saw it too. And then he was gone. A last glance over the shoulder, and that was that, at least until the next day. Sure enough, my sisters and I found our way down to the river. We stripped down to nothing but the skin on our backs, as we always did, because there weren't any strangers in the Nantahala at that time, and those that lived there minded their business. An alley cat can always find its way, though, and as we lay there splashing in the crick and being the girls we were on a hot summer day, there came Emmett Adams. Tall and lanky with a splash of dark hair, he strode through the trees on the far end of the clearing and stood there like a crane watching a pool of minnows. When we saw him, my sisters made such a fuss, splashing and hollering till I shushed them back down and told them to gather their clothes and to head back home and to not tell our mother. All the while, he stood there a gander off downstream until the others had left. The air that day was twitching with the dry heat, while the sun made the leaves shine like flecks of gold. The cold water from the high hills around me, I let the stream carry me down the bend to where he stood. Swimming there in the deep end, naked as the day I was born, I called up to him on the banks. "Why are you just standing there and watching us?" "Because," he said with that sly look, "I haven't ever seen a girl as beautiful as you before." Now, I may have lived in the hills all my life, but believe me that even young as I was, this was not the first time a boy had told me that. Still, it felt good, though it tasted a lie. "If that's so," I said, "then why are you still standing up there on that bank?" Oh, I know I could be rotten sometimes, but I didn't expect him to take his clothes off right then and actually jump in. That splash he made when he jumped, it's like I can still feel it, the surprise of it. And when he grabbed me in his arms, hush, hush, child, it ain't like that. He just kissed me is all, and I him, pressed against each other like that, hot bodies in cold water. But then I pushed him away and made my way to my side of the river, and he to his. "Where are you going?" he called. "Home," I said. "It's almost supper, and it will be night soon. You should get back to your mansion before the sun goes down. These are not your woods." "It's a hunting lodge," he had pouted, and I had to laugh a little, the way his feelings all puffed up. "Not a mansion. What is your name?" So I shouted back, "Susanna." "I'm Emmett Adams. I want to see you again," he said, now pulling his shirt back over his chest and pulling his suspenders tight again. "When can I see you again?" I thought on it for a moment and told him, and he said that he would meet me there later that night. I was no fool. I knew exactly what I was doing, if not the entirety of the thing. But my intent was strong and true when I snuck out that night. After Mama and my sisters had gone to sleep, and the rest of the little lights in the holler went low, I crept out the window and was gone into the night. That evening, when I left my house, the moon was as high and full as the swollen belly of a woman with a child. Her glow was bright, too, leaving a trace of silver dusting upon each blade of grass, drop of dew, and upturned leaf. The mother's own presence had waned so much, I doubt she felt me or any of the others stir that night. And in the darkness, I made my way to the base of that bald hill over yonder. In the cold shadow, I waited and waited for what seemed like forever. There was electricity in the air, though, like the whole of the world was waking up. White things crawled and jittered through the trees, and the calls of the sisters cried out. But still, where was that boy, I thought. And then he was there, my Emmett, walking down the road for me like he said he would, tall as a branch of willow and just as thin a thing. I felt myself carried away in his arms when he swept me up to kiss him. Nothing is like the kiss of a boy when you are just a girl, and those things are still new, before time wears away the novelty, and the gray of things comes along. That, time, and the loss of the appreciation of the simple things, is what bears the magic low. When no one can see what is before their eyes in the dark, then it never comes to be. Remember that, child. Tucked away in my shoe, I kept the kitchen knife I had taken from home with me. It weren't nothing more than a fillet knife my mother would use for fish, but it was enough for what I intended. Emmett held my hand, and I led him down the path, through the little grove of pines at the base of that hill, and we walked in the moonlight. The forest was a dapple of silver and black. The summer air sweet and sticky as syrup, the two of us like honeybees in our youth. I was so nervous I could feel myself shaking as we strolled, pretending all the while to be casual, as if either of us knew what we were doing, beyond just an idea. Then, there, about halfway up the hill, when I felt a creeping sense of doubt begin to come over me, Emmett's hand gave mine a little squeeze. "Look," he said, stopping and gesturing to a little patch in the path ahead. Silver light had broken through the canopy and shone down before us, and there, in the middle of the path, sat something. In the dark, it took my eyes a moment to understand what it was I were seeing. 3 tall and fat rabbits, white as moonlight, sat plumb in the middle of the path. All 3 stood frozen, patient, watching us there, noses twitching, their eyes watching without pause or hesitation. It was Emmett now who began to shake, quivering at the sight of them. It gave me another feeling, however, a sense of righteousness, that me and my sisters were not alone in the forest that night, that he who treaded these woods might send his messengers to watch over us. "That's not natural," Emmett said, and for the first time I thought of what a boy he really was. "Oh, hush," I told him firmly. "Birds and beasts roam these parts day and night. Maybe it ain't the same in the low country. Maybe they raise you all different." I did know what to say to him, and I could see his face turn a shade, even in the shadows. I leaned in and kissed him then, gently this time, and took his hand and led him forward. When, after a moment, like a stubborn bull, he began to walk again, the 3 messengers had already stepped aside and slunk back off into the forest to watch. Not much longer, perhaps because the ground beneath us urged our feet forward, or because I pulled so hard on his hand leading him, we came to the top of that bald hill. Stepping out of the trees, we both saw the stones, that ring of bare and weathered rock, 9 stones that sits up there. You know the ones. We all see them in our dreams, deep in the forest, staring back. Give me your lighter, I told him. I want a cigarette. So he did. He gave me his lighter and one of those fancy cigarettes, pre-rolled and bought from in town. The kind I knew he had on him without knowing, without him having to tell. Same way I knew the little petrol lighter he kept with him was a graduation present from his pa, though he never said nothing about it. The tobacco tasted sweet, and I took a bundle of sticks from the floor around me. And then I led him by the hand into that clearing at the end of the path, bundle of sticks in my arm. He watched like a sheep as I lit the little wad of leaves and made us a tiny fire there. To keep us warm, I told him. By the look in his face, I'm not sure he'd ever seen a woman start a fire on her own in the woods, lighter or not. Then I pulled him close, pushing him against my chest. I kissed him hard, and I let his hands wander while I took out the knife from my shoe. "What are you doing with that?" he asked, more curious than frightened. "Give me your hair," I told him, reaching up for a lock of his chestnut-colored hair, dancing in the light of the fire. "Give me your hair," I said again, and he didn't resist, just bent down and let me cut a piece. "You are the strangest girl," he had started to say, but this time I pulled him down into that circle. I felt the fear and anticipation building, felt the breath of him beneath and between me until I could take it no more. And then and there I gave myself into him, mounting and riding him like Delilah conquered Samson. In the intensity of the thing, in the motion of our bodies, and the playing of the light from the fire and shadows against the rocks, I heard my sisters again cry out. At the edge of the trees they moved, watching and waiting. They could feel it too. The foundation of the mountain itself was buzzing, like the summer sun had thrown itself into the moon that night. A hot rolled up from inside of me and through the world. The sisters again cried out, this time in rhythm, in unison, and I heard Emmett ask in alarm what was happening. In that moment, I felt the turning of the wheel of things and knew it was right. I cast the hair into the fire beside us, drew my knife up, and called the name of the master of the forest, of he who treads on hoofed and cloven feet, and brought my knife down. And all of creation stopped. Above me I felt silver coins shower down from the moonlight as all the world froze. My sisters still hiding in the trees, stuck as though time had stopped, and the boy beneath me still stunned and surprised before the first drop of blood had even fallen. And there, with him as part of me, and at the gates of death, I could hear the bootsteps approaching from behind me. The strong and supple voice asked softly, from just at the edge of earshot, "What was it that I wanted?" And I told him, a long life, a rich life, and all the power of the Nantahala and the mother. And in the next moment, time unstuck. My sister sprung forward from the trees, shrieking with glee, dancing about wildly with joy, for he had come once again. The boy beneath my thighs sputtered and died. Still, the sisters danced, while the others wrenched at their clothes and tore away strips of flesh from the thing in the circle of stones. I descended that mountain in the dawning of the sun, with their outstretched and bloody hands reaching for me. "Mother," they called, "Mother, Mother, great Mother." But still, there was work to be done, I knew. One left for him. And so I made my way down the mountain, and for miles through the path to Mother Sarah's cabin. For what mother to my kin would I be without the knowledge to pass on? So I went and knocked, and when no answer came, I went inside. It was as it always was, for we knew it well as girls, but the bedroom door was closed, and when I opened it, the covers were all pulled up to the shift robe the mother kept behind her bed. I knew something was in there, on account of the way the blankets moved up and down, like there was breathing from beneath. Next to the bed, I saw the book, bound and untitled as it ever was or may be. I could have left then, without lifting the sheets, taking the book with me, but it wouldn't have been right. Back in the 21st century, Hannah asked, "Are you for real, Nan? Come on now. Take the book and leave, right?" Nan stubbed out what remained of her back and laughed. "No, child, it wouldn't have been the way of things. A mother must settle her business, you hear me? So I lifted the sheets." Old Nan rubbed herself then, despite the heat, as though a chill draft had passed over her, though Hannah felt nothing. "It was a rabbit under those sheets," old Nan said after a moment. "Not a normal one either. When I pulled them back, she rose up tall and mean and staring down at me. She was pressed up against the ceiling, long white robe still draping her. The ears had stretched outward and pointed, fur-covered white. Still, I remember those pink eyes, big as a man's fist, staring down with all the fury in the world. But she couldn't touch me. Not anymore. Not after that. So I took the book and left." Neither of them spoke. A dog barked in boredom somewhere in the distance, and then it was quiet again, save for the buzzing of the insects on that porch. Moments later, Hannah's cell phone chimed, and before she could stop herself, she looked and saw the message. "That boy finally come around to his senses?" old Nan asked. Hannah smiled. "Says he's sorry, and he'll be here in a few." Old Nan returned the smile and said that was nice. Then she put another cigarette in her mouth and motioned to Hannah. "Before you go, girl, can you?" she said. Hannah picked up the lighter and lit the old woman's cigarette again. She felt the metal in her hand, and when she did so, she thought of her great-grandmother's story. "Was this Grandpa Nestor's lighter? It was, weren't it?" Taking another drag, old Nan looked up at Hannah, or just over her shoulder as she tended to, and said solemnly, "No, Nestor didn't smoke, but I know what you're asking. That was a habit I picked up that night from Emmett, along with the lighter." The weight of the metal seemed to grow heavier, somehow, in Hannah's hand then. She set it down next to old Nan and made the leave back down the road. She was thinking of her own boy, and her own night tonight. She turned back to the older woman then, still watching her go. "Do you still think about him then? That boy, that night on the hill?" Hannah asked. As straightforward and solemn as before, old Nan called back, "Of course, child. Emmett's been with me ever since then, watching, angry as the old mother, waiting for his day, for my time to come." She took another long drag, then said, "Why, he's been standing behind you this whole time."
Thank you very much for listening. Your thoughts and time are very valuable, so thank you for choosing to spend some of it here with me. Wherever you are out there, know that you are not alone, and that we will be here to keep telling stories through the night. If you enjoyed this story, please like and subscribe, and tell friends and family who like this sort of stuff. As an independent writer and artist, producing these works takes a ton of time and effort, done purely from a passion to tell stories. If you want to support me directly, please consider checking out my other works at www.fictionalpage.com or become a patron at patreon.com/fictionalpage, or use the links below. Thanks for listening, and until next time.